Welcome to the High Note Podcast. I am Ted Zimnicki, founder of HNPacademy.com and High Note Performance, where we take the tools perfected by athletics and neurology and bring them to stage athletes to turn them into the type of artists that companies can't help but hire again and again and again. In this episode, we got to sit down with Johanna Moffitt, the artistic director of Core Productions, to talk about all of her incredible insights into how to take a work from barely a concept to fully written to being performed all over the country and all over the world. Before we get into things, if you are the type of singer who wants to become the artist athlete that companies can't help but hire, be sure to check out the Mind-Body Connection quiz in the description down below. Click that link, take the short quiz, and we will give you a customized program so you know exactly what the best next steps are so you can advance yourself. Without any further ado, here's Joanne. Welcome to the High Note Podcast. I am Ted Zimnicki, founder of High Note Performance and HNPacademy.com, where we bring the tools perfected by sports science and neurology to vocal artists to turn singers into the kind of world-class athletes that companies want to hire again and again and again. Today we have with us an incredible soprano, director, both artistic and executive, who runs her very own company, Core Productions, the one and only Johanna Moffitt. Johanna Moffitt. I'm so sorry for getting the vowel wrong, but let's run with that one. Johanna.
I'm happy. I'm so happy. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you. And I would love to know, with so many different titles and jobs that you currently hold, and I'm sure have held in the past as well,
Yes.
when someone asks you, hey, what do you do? How do you respond?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. So it depends on the situation I'm in because sometimes you want to be able to fly under the radar. If you tell everyone you are a producer, like up front, sometimes they're throwing pitches at you, and you're like, "Well, actually, I just wanted to enjoy my whiskey in peace." But most of the time, I tell people that I'm an opera singer, or I've studied classical music, or I'm a musician. And then if they pry a little further, I'll tell them that I'm a teacher and that I conduct a choir and that I run a production company. And it also depends on, what's going on in the season. If I have something to invite someone to, I'm going to tell them right up front, yes, I'm a producer and come see my show next week. Like, so is that a good answer?
I think so, absolutely, because it is situational, right? So these days, what do you do? Where are most of your hours spent?
Gosh, so I have a split of hours. The bulk of the work that I do is with an organization called Be at the Glen. I'm the music director for their choir out there, and it is a retirement community. And it's been fascinating to learn sort of how to deal with many different levels of dementia
Hmm.
and of ability and of interest. And I'm fascinated. So it's a choir of retirees who live in this community together, and they're wonderful people. They're so warm and so giving. But some of them are in the choir because they want to do something fun, and some of them are in the choir because they're retired musicians, and some
Mm.
of them are in the choir just because it's something to do. And so I have to kind of take all of that into account as I'm shaping, the music selections that we have and the warm-ups that I do, and the kind of way that I put the season together for them. It has to be a little bit of fun and a little bit of challenge and a little, it's very interesting. I'm really grateful for this experience because it's actually made me look at other relationships completely differently.
Mm.
So I'm queer and I do a lot of work in the queer community, and a lot of us tend to be neurodivergent because it's just the way that it kind of works out. it makes sense that someone who chooses something that, or not chooses, who someone who is uh, oriented in a way that's perceived as like different from the norm also has a different, way of interacting with the world, right? Some of us are autistic and some of us have incredible ADHD and some of us, there's just like many, many different ways. And so it's helped me kind of shift my way of experiencing that community a little bit because I was like, oh, I can take this experience that I've had here with these people who have varying levels of interest and varying levels of, you know, capability and bring that into other experiences that I have in my daily life. It's kind of awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a huge that was a huge high level explanation. But yeah,
No, I think that's
I love the work I'm doing. That's one. And then I
yeah.
also teach in my private studio at home, and I teach at DePaul University as well in
Okay.
the community music division.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I love teaching.
Okay. So
It's ingrained in me
when I
from an
hear
early age.
community music at a university, in my mind,
Yeah,
that means usually like middle school, high school age.
actually, I have a lot of adults,
Oh,
and I think I'm one of the teachers who specializes in adults. I have a few children in my studio, but actually, most of my students are from 20 to 30,
oh, okay.
and they're like professionals who have come back to music in adulthood or exploring music for the first time in adulthood because they always had an interest in it, but didn't have the means or didn't have encouragement
Hmm.
to study music. I don't know if you teach, but I find that a lot of my adult students are this way. There's someone in their life that has told them that they're not capable enough, they're not talented enough, they're not, something is not good enough. And so they come to me and they're a little bit timid about singing it. I'm like, no, come on, give it to me. I want to hear I want to hear your sound. Everything that you do is valid because there's no one way to sing and every genre is valid. And so let's just do it. But yeah, I love teaching at the community music division. It's so fun.
That's awesome.
My students are great.
That's so cool. So I only thought that because when I was in middle school and high school, the programs I was at public school didn't have a whole lot of investment in music. So I was at the community division at the
Ah,
Hart School in Hartford, Connecticut. Uh,
yeah.
so that's where I
What a
got
great
that
school.
age. Yeah, I didn't know what I
Yeah.
had until I'd left. But
Isn't that sad? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, okay, so your day to day really sort of runs the gamut as far as education,
Yeah.
experience, age, uh, all everything.
Yeah. And I think that it's made me a better teacher, to be honest,
Mm.
and that maybe a better human being because I have to put myself in the other person's shoes, and not just cookie cutter opera singer, everyone, and I think sometimes maybe that would have been a better experience even at the high level that I studied
Mm.
in university, if my professors had treated me with the same kind of explorative kindness,
Mm.
I might have had an easier time in school. Once I got to Chicago and performing, it was a lot different. It was a whole different animal, and yeah, I'm grateful. I'm grateful because um, like you, I also started in a community music school, and I think that the to be able to give back to the community in that way is like really gratifying to me.
Mm.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I would love to talk about that transition that you mentioned, sort of from
Mm,
school to a little bit more professional. You mentioned it was
absolutely.
difficult.
Oh yeah. So I went to Indiana University in Bloomington, and it's an amazing school.
Yeah.
Like I think it's an incredible school, but I found myself wishing for more performance opportunities and for I worked a lot in the opera program there behind the scenes, and I actually think that's what made me the producer that I am today. And I'm grateful for that. But I think that when I left Indiana, it was because I was so burnt out. I couldn't do it anymore. I remember walking home from campus one day, and I was just my feet were moving so slowly. I couldn't like you just kind of uh no one at that time talked about burnout in the way that we do today. And I couldn't I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I don't know what, and I literally thought to myself, well, why don't we just stop this? Like we don't have to do this. So and the moment I had that idea, I was like, oh right. And everything like lifted off of me. And so anyway, so I moved to Chicago back in 2013. And and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I felt like I wasn't ready to go out for auditions because I still was feeling a little bit hurt from my burnout. Um, and so I started working at a bar
Hmm.
like you do.
Yeah.
Started working at a bar, and I met a wonderful group of musical theater kids there, and they cast me in a production of the musical Little Women, and it opened my eyes. First of all, to like the the ability to be able to put on my own, like see that you could put on your own show. I was like, oh right, I know how to do that. Number one, and number two, that there was a different, there was a community that was interested in me as a performer. I just had to find it. Of course, I just had to find it. And so I let that kind of like stew in the back of my brain somewhere. And then one day I woke up and I realized that I had this quartet of friends. I had a tenor, another soprano, and a baritone that I knew. And I was like, oh, we could sing Bohème. There's the quartet, like
There it is.
we could do Bohème. And that was just like the thought that I had. And then I went back to sleep. I think it was like woke up from sleeping and went back to sleep. And then the next day I woke up and I thought, oh, we could do Bohème in the bar that I work at. That would be interesting. And then just something like switched in my brain. So I found a friend of mine at the time who had come from Indiana to Chicago as well. Talked to them about this project, and they were like, "Well, that's great. I want to direct that." And I was like, "Okay." So all of a sudden, I had a quartet and a director. Okay, cool. And then I said, "Well, if we do this show in the bar, I think it would be more interesting if we utilize the whole space
Hmm.
to let the community that comes to our show feel like part of the experience in an indirect kind of way. But, by putting the proximity so close to the singers, they would feel like they were part of the the story themselves. And we took the show apart and put it into like kind of bite-sized pieces. We did act one week, and then we did two and three another week, and then we did
Hmm.
four the last week. We sold out every single performance,
Wow.
and it was so fun. It was so fun because so the bar was set up. There was the bar. It was a kind of like in a U or a oval shape.
Okay.
There was a I don't know, should I do it like this? There was the bar on one side and a row of booths on the other side, and in the middle were a bunch of high top tables and booths.
Mhm.
So we could use the entire space. And at one end, there was like a sort of makeshift stage. And at the end of the booth, there was a little bit of space at the end there that so someone could stand there potentially, and there was like a little half wall, and we used that to sit on until
Oh,
it
wow.
was so cool because the action happened all around all of the audience, and they could see us and feel part of it. And anyway, so we did that we did that first show, and I thought, well, I kind of want to do more shows like this. And so we did uh for 3 years, 2, 3 years, we did shows kind of in that style where we utilized uh, a space that was for meant for other things, a bar,
Yeah.
a restaurant, a coffee house, the burger house, which is part of the Chicago park system.
Okay. The burger.
Yeah, we
Sounds
used
awesome.
yeah. Sorry, that was the name of the family that used to live there.
Oh.
Berger burger. The burger house. It's a So we did Figaro, the marriage of Figaro, the Mozart, in a house, and so we got to move from room to room with the characters as their story unfolds, and it was so awesome. Anyway, so we
I'm
did all
glad
of
you.
that.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
glad you mentioned that because I had this idea of like a burger joint, like a hamburger restaurant, which might work if you started off in a bar. Now you're in a burger joint.
It
uh,
could work. It could work.
yeah.
But the whole my purpose, my mission with these kind of projects came to be that by putting opera in non-traditional spaces, a non-traditional audience would come.
Mm,
And that's what happened. And people were excited because we made the shows like bite size, you know, so that it was more approachable, but not in a way that was dumbing it down.
sure.
Um, and we found creative ways to deal with translation. Like for Bohème in a Bar, we had these amazing actors from the Second City come in and like
Oh,
do improv to explain what was going to happen during the process of the show.
okay.
And that was really cool. Um, yeah, it was awesome. The whole concept was just to bring the community together. So we were really successful with that. And then I took a little break for about a year and a half, and we were in the process of coming back when the pandemic happened.
Mm,
And I was like,
sure.
oh, okay, what are we gonna do? And then we pivoted to um, to do shows online. I saw this article someone had written. Um, I don't know. Someone sent it to me. Like, I think it was meant as a kind thing because I don't know. My mom sent it to me. Someone else gave it to her, but it was about how opera wasn't going to happen
Mm,
because there was no way that we could gather together and sing in the same presence of each other. And I was furious. I was furious. I thought, well, that just can't be. There has to be a way that we can meet with each other, that we can still connect. Because I think that it was wonderful to watch all the television that I did, and it was wonderful to watch all of the recorded performances. Because, when do you have the chance to have time to watch all of those things? But what we were missing was connecting with each other, right?
mhm.
Right, really experiencing that together. And so I called up my friend Elijah Lee, who is an amazing tech, brilliant. Like he's just like a savant about tech.
Awesome.
He's a genius. Um, and he was like, um, I said, Elijah, is there a way that we can do opera live over technology? Like,
Mm,
is there a platform that we could use? And he said, well, we can experiment with different things and see if something works. And I was like, okay. So we tried Facebook Live. That was a disaster. We
yeah.
tried Like I think we tried Instagram, that wasn't good. And then we tried Zoom. And we were able to little by little make create an experience that felt that was live. Like we were all singing together live, but that felt more like that special thing that we had created as a community, as a community, a company that caters to the community.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most fun things I've ever done was that whole experiment. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I think
So yeah,
well,
anyone who wants to see those things are still on our YouTube channel. It's awesome. Anyway,
and of
what were we
course
gonna say?
it'll be linked in the description down below to
Yes.
the left,
Yeah.
depending on what platform
Yeah.
you're on.
Yeah.
But I think
Oh,
COVID was one of those things that was so interesting because the people who were in opera for the sake of opera, that's just what they had been doing for however long, and then an obstacle
right.
came in the way, and it was almost a convenient excuse to not do it anymore, and they took that
Uh,
convenient excuse to not do it anymore. Meanwhile, the
yeah.
for lack of a better term, the diehards like yourself, instead viewed it as a challenge. And you used a word in your explanation there that I just love. You said experiment, right? You said
Mhm.
what platform can we do this on? And your collaborator said, I don't know, let's experiment. And I just love that. I'm all about it.
It was so fun, and it was so. The reason it was so exciting to me is like we just literally didn't know what would happen, you know.
Yeah. And you had a
So
couple of experiments that didn't work out, but you just tried
yep,
something different, right? Change a
that's
variable
right.
and experiment again. Uh, and
Exactly.
that's such a core concept in sports science and neurology, and I love seeing it applied elsewhere too.
Well, I keep thinking about how so many of us lose our curiosity about how things work, or we get older and we kind of get set in our ways, and I just it doesn't work for me. I need to keep learning new things, and I need to keep experiencing new things, and I think that's one of the reasons why I love producing and directing is because you're literally trying something new every time,
Yeah.
and it's so fun.
Yeah.
Every job should be this fun.
If only, right? If only. So
Yeah,
you mentioned directing and producing, and you started off by finding some friends in the bar that were musical theater kids. Uh,
yeah.
is opera your preferred genre, or are you eclectic enough that you'll sort of
Ah,
do whatever comes along?
um, well, how do I answer that question? I don't love all opera
Okay.
and I don't love all musical theater, but I love a lot of it, and and I value it, if that makes sense. And so um it's not about doing what comes along, but it's more for me going, oh, that project sounds interesting. I want to. So the last project I did outside of my company was I music directed Grey Gardens for Big Noise Theater
Okay.
in Des Plaines, Illinois, and I've never music directed a show that was professional before, and so that was a new experience for me. And I was like, that sounds interesting. This music is challenging, and it was really cool. And I I I hope I get to do that again because I learned so much from it, and I really really enjoyed it. And I had to think through things um, from a different perspective. I'm usually the one in charge of the budget and hiring everyone, but this time I was just in charge of the musicians and just the ensemble, not even like necessarily the singers.
Mhm.
I worked with them, um, and I had ideas about who I thought we should hire, but the ultimate decision wasn't down to what I thought, and that was a new experience, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the challenge of trying to fit into someone else's ideas, and
Mm.
it was cool. It was very cool.
Okay.
Why did I bring that up? Oh, because yeah, that's the last project I did outside of my company, and I would absolutely do that again if if it were a musical that I was excited about.
Mhm.
Say, and the same for opera. So the last show that I was working on, I produced for Core Productions in conjunction with the Hillman Opera at SUNY Fredonia, at the State University of New York at Fredonia, and um, it was a dark comedy about a cannibal who likes to get to know his guests before he enjoys them.
Is this the workshop that we were talking
And
about before we?
yes,
Okay,
yeah.
wonderful.
It's called Having Guests for Dinner, and the composer is Nicholas Benz, and the librettist is Robert Fong. Robert is a longtime collaborator of mine. He's performed in two of our online shows, and he's just a spectacular human being. And I was so grateful to meet his friend Nick, the composer, and I'm so proud of this production because, first of all, working with the Western New York Chamber Orchestra in the way that we did was it was really impressive. They
Mm.
took some super complicated music and made it shimmer and shine, um, and the singers were uh, two students from the school and one who had worked with a student of one of the faculty members from a former like a former institution that he worked with, and they were young and so eager and so fantastic. They were not just great singers and brought in bringing the music to life, but they also were fantastic actors, and it was so fun to watch this show come together that we've been, working towards in that workshop performance. It was so cool. So yes, if I think a show, my answer is I will literally do it. So I love storytelling. I love film. I love music directing. I love directing. I love stage direction. I love all of it. So, yes. I've, dir- I've directed plays. I've directed uh, cantatas.
Mhm.
I've directed operas, musicals, you name it. I've done a lot in my career. Did I ever tell you I was in a film?
That's new information to me, but your resume just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. The more I let
Don't
you
look at
go,
my
the
CV.
more things you come up with. Uh, and that's all really amazing that you took what was a and please correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but you took what was a purely classical education, right? I think I saw you have a bachelor's and a master's both in opera voice performance. Is that correct so
Yes,
far?
that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you took it and you grew to be someone who is so wildly eclectic in the best possible way.
Thank you.
That's phenomenal.
I value that in other people as well. I love talking to people who have the same kind of curiosity as me. I do have a minor in theater, which is something that was really important to me when I was at IU. I got to do a lot of work with dialect, with movement. Um, that was so important.
Mm.
It was really foundational to I think to the person that I am today. So,
Yeah. If only more opera singers had minors in theater, maybe.
oh man,
Well,
it's
so
so hard.
I think that brings
Yeah,
up a
go ahead.
really interesting thing that we can talk about for a bit.
Mm,
So obviously, if you look at the numbers of regional opera companies that have existed 10 years ago versus now, that number has diminished by a large amount,
absolutely.
right? I don't know the specific numbers and I would get them wrong even if I had them, but it's clearly gone down by a lot, right? Even the
Right.
number of posts on Yap Tracker yearly has decreased by quite a bit. The viewership numbers and the ticket sales from even the largest opera houses in the country. I'm sorry, I don't know international numbers, but like the Met and LA Opera and Houston, like all of those organizations are diminishing in ticket sales. And
Yeah.
the story that tells is that the place that existed for opera might not anymore, at least not opera in its grand traditional form,
Right.
right? So what kind of place do you think opera has in the next 10 years?
Well, so I think that's a great question. And I don't think that there's one right answer, but what I see, the things that I see being really popular at the Lyric, for example, are new works by minority composers
Mm.
um, that have where the lyric or where the composer has done the work to reach out into their community and say, "Hey, we're doing this production. Come see it if you can." And I saw okay, so the show that I saw most recently and was super impressed by was Fire Shut Up in My Bones, which was
Oh
like
yeah.
almost 2 years ago at the Lyric. I love the Lyric. Don't get me wrong, but that show. It really impressed me. It was sold out every show. The 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 book itself was fantastic. Like the story was incredible. The acting and singing was spectacular, and I think that Chicago is a really theater heavy city, and so when there's a new production of something or something that has this kind of um, they call it like when people are interested
Mm.
in a story like this, Chicago like jumps on it, you know. And so it was amazing to be at the theater and see how full it was and how into the story people were. I mean, you heard gasps from the audience. The bad guy got booed. You know, there was just
Yeah.
like all this really great stuff that like I want that. I want people to be interacting with theater in that way. And so I think I was just talking about this with a friend yesterday.
Oh, cool.
Um, that the biggest challenge that we're facing right now as a genre is accessibility um, and and funding, right? Most companies you see are cutting down their seasons because what we realized during the pandemic is that we're not treating artists with enough respect. And in a capitalist society, respect means money.
Hmm.
And um, and so we are looking to pay people more with less
Yeah,
funding,
as funds are drying up.
right? As funds are drying up. So we are we are cutting our seasons down, losing smaller companies, and but also trying desperately to pay people more money. The people that we are working with, we're trying to give them more, which I think is admirable and what should be happening. But you know, this kind of anyway, what I hope to see is more companies like mine find innovative ways to connect with community because if we don't do that, we may see opera kind of fade out. And I really hope that doesn't happen because operas like Having Guests for Dinner deserve to be seen because they're fantastic and funny. And people, like our audience, was so connected to the story and
Mhm.
to the music. So I hope that that doesn't happen.
Can I ask maybe
I'm scared. Go ahead.
this is kind of a semantic, maybe even a little bit silly question, but
Love it.
I think it's valuable for a moment here. What's the difference between an opera and a musical?
Oh, great. Huh.
Because clearly there's an audience for musicals, right? Hamilton shows that. The fact that Broadway is what Broadway is shows that. What's the difference between an opera and a musical?
I think I think that's a really hard question to answer these days. And I don't mean that flippantly. I mean like it's hard because the line between what it like it used to be, right? That opera is something that's sung from the beginning to the end
Mhm.
in a certain style, right? But Hamilton is rapped the entire time, right? There's like very little lines in that that aren't music with music. And so does that mean it's an opera? I don't know. Like,
I could see an argument either way.
right, exactly. It's about the style of the genre, right?
Yeah.
In the end. And so that's why we would call it a musical. But these days, I think that opera still has the stigma of being unapproachable
Mhm.
because it's something that is maybe in another language, something that is a challenging subject matter or an antiquated subject matter um, that makes people not feel seen. Whereas musical theater is either you're like deeply invested in the story as a person, or it's a way to escape, right? And I think that we just haven't opera needs to like rebrand,
Yeah.
and be a little bit more approachable and um be a little bit kinder to its audience without dumbing down, without going, oh, well, if we do this in this way, then people will get it. Well, no, like people are smart; they're going to get it. You just have to help them connect with it. And what does that mean? Well, that's different for every audience,
Right.
right?
Right. And
So,
I think opera is in, I should be more specific. The tradition of grand opera is in a really
right,
difficult position when it comes to that because so many of those operas that were huge hits in their time and continue to be today rely on social and cultural traditions that we no longer abide by. The one that jumps to mind
right,
immediately is Traviata,
right.
right? Because we don't like the whole brother marries a courtesan. First of all, courtesans don't exist anymore, and
Thank
that
goodness.
right, and that ruins the family name, so the sister can't find like that's not a connection that the average human in
Right,
2024 would make without
right.
substantial education, and we don't want to make going to the theater feel like work, right? You don't want to have to do homework to enjoy a piece of art.
Right. And you shouldn't like so if I were going to do Traviata, I would either find a way to make it relevant,
Mm-hmm.
to, modernize it or something to make it relevant to the audience I'm presenting it to, or show the audience that the thing that they can take away from the story is two people who love each other who cannot be together,
Yeah.
and fantastic music that highlights an emotional connection, right? So the reason I think that poem resonates with a modern audience is because we can understand a romantic relationship that doesn't connect, right? That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't it happens like we feel passionate love for someone in the beginning and then things go badly,
Yeah.
right? Somebody's sick. You can't deal with that person being sick. This is a thing that happens to people every day.
It,
This is a normal experience,
this
right?
is this is I mean, coming off of COVID, we're right there.
Right. Oh my gosh. Talk to me about Singing with Me during COVID. I still haven't watched Act Four. I can't watch it. I'm
Oof.
so terrified.
Well, and I'm so glad that you brought up Bohem because that plot, that story, was so beautifully reimagined by Jonathan Larson in Rent.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So what are your
Absolutely.
feelings about that?
So I think that it's so funny to talk about Rent because Rent is like an outdated musical
Oh,
now.
it totally is. Yeah, it totally is. Right.
But I love that. I love that idea of taking a story that we know that people can connect with
Mhm.
and making it connect with a modern audience. I mean, that's why Rent was so successful, is because we could see ourselves in those people. We could see ourselves, in our friend who maybe is not doing okay in their 20s in New York, or our moody moody roommate
Yeah.
who is upset for valid reasons, but like doesn't know how to express themselves and express their anger and sadness in a healthy way. Someone who's avoiding their parents because they don't want to deal with the fact that they can't handle uh, the queerness of the child, or like all those things can resonate with us. Um, and I think that today, if we were going to take the Bohem story and modernize it even further, I think now we can explore transgender bodies
Mm.
and non-binary bodies and what that experience is like, and keep those characters because why not? Everybody's got a friend who tries to kill a parent, right?
Yeah, that's just normal. Whatever. Uh, I had four, and I did not have four. That was. Uh, yeah, I think this is such an interesting conversation. I feel very very lucky that
Yeah,
I get to have it with such diverse and interesting people. Uh,
yeah,
but I think
me
it
too.
it often comes back to the word accessibility, and I know I've brought this up
Right.
on podcasts before, so listeners forgive me as I'm going to harp on this for a second. Uh, but Joanna, what does accessibility mean?
It means many different things in many different ways. Sometimes it means uh, making the characters showing diversity in the characters so that people can see themselves in the story. Sometimes it means making sure that the story is relatable to the audience. I have to say, I think one of the biggest challenges was Falstaff
Mm,
for us. Um, if I had it to do again, I probably would do the whole show differently. Um, but then I got to be in a production of Falstaff a few years later that was politically charged. That was so
mm.
interesting. But I played Bardolfo,
Okay.
which is traditionally a tenor role.
Right.
But it was so interesting to to be in a modernized production where I had freedom. The director gave us a lot of freedom to explore our characters, which was so helpful. And I thought, well, if Bardolfo is a female character, what are the things that drive them? What are and I started to look at the conversations that Bardolfo was happening at the end of at the end of the act. They're just kind of sobering up, right?
Right.
And they're connected to Falstaff, and they want to they're trying to like further themselves by being connected to Falstaff. At the end of I think it's the second act or whatever, the next part, then they're connected with John, um, with the uh, John Ford,
Mhm.
right? Trying to further themselves that way, but that doesn't go anywhere. But then they realize at the end of the opera that it's the connection to Alice that's going to make them, help them in their personal journey. And so that I started to see that in that way. Um, so for that to me was about telling a person's story so that the audience could connect with me, coming from a drunkard to like a person who is like valued in society,
Mm.
going through this long arc, right? And I think that um, accessibility in that way becomes about storytelling and how do you connect with this particular audience. I think that when we talk about accessibility often in the opera world, it had been to, give people literally to give people access, changing ticket sales or taking, the young artist program to sing at a school somewhere. But that to me is a little bit short-sighted. It
Mm.
it's not building a relationship with the community. And I think that relationship building is what causes companies to look at accessibility in a larger way, in a way where you're where you're going, oh, this community has a lot of native people in it. So maybe we can look at bringing in someone to talk about how this relates to native culture, or how this story could be perceived in that world.
Mm.
Something like it's about putting yourself in another person's shoes and going, okay, what would this person connect with in this story? What would this person feel seen by? And
I think that's
I'm
such that's
yeah,
that's such such a great way to look at the struggle of trying to produce an opera that was written in the 1800s in 2024. uh, and just as you were talking, this thought occurred to me that it's not that companies don't know that relationships are important, right? Like these are huge,
right,
potentially multi-million dollar
right,
organizations. Like they know how to, like
right,
they've done this before, hopefully, fingers crossed.
yeah,
um,
yeah,
but maybe it feels like the relationship they're trying to further is with a dead composer. Like they're trying to honor Puccini's legacy rather than honor their audience. Does that make any sense? I literally haven't thought about that until right
absolutely.
this second.
No, that absolutely makes sense. I mean, it depends on your audience, right? It depends on who's coming to your show. There is an audience that wants to honor Puccini's legacy, right?
Totally.
But that's not going to be most people that you walk down the street talk to. And and I found myself early on having lots of conversations with people about opera and what they thought about it, when they had had any interaction with it. And
If
in
they had any
Chicago,
interaction.
if they had any, in Chicago, overwhelmingly, what I found was there was a that people had seen one opera from between the grade 3 and grade 6,
Mhm.
um, like scene one, because their class had gone to the Lyric to see a show
Or they had like an
as
outreach
a class.
performance or something like that.
Right, right. 45 minutes of a show that they were doing that students would appreciate, which is awesome. I don't want to take away that is an awesome thing. But then there was no follow up after that. There was no, um, the students didn't go to see another show the following year, or uh, they didn't then say to their parents, like, oh, let's go see a show, right? Because they didn't have someone say, maybe we should try that again. Maybe we should, and and I would ask those people, well, what do you think about opera? And they're like, oh, well, it's boring, or it's for rich people,
Yeah.
or it's
Or they don't think
um,
about opera at all. It's not even on the
right
radar.
in their yeah, it's not even their scope. And so when I would tell people I'm an opera singer, they're like, wow, what does that mean?
Yeah. Like that's a thing? We still do that? Like are you also a horse and buggy driver? Like what? Let me get your powdered wig ready. Like that's
Right, right.
yeah. It seems
So
like such an
yeah,
antiquated thing sometimes, right?
right. And I think that in Chicago, well, at least in Chicago, I feel like I have a really good pulse on, or at least before the pandemic.
Mm.
Now I'm not so sure. I'm working on it. But before the pandemic, I found that most people were interested to come see at least one show,
Mm.
and and then I would try to have a conversation with them afterwards, asking them what they liked about it and what they didn't like, what they thought was relevant and what they thought was, outdated or didn't make sense. Um, and I guess after having those conversations, you start to feel like you can kind of see where they're coming from. Like
Mm.
like yeah, it can be boring. It can be a little bit dull sometimes. But what are the ways that we can make it, a more joyful experience for them, right? I I challenge anyone any company that hasn't thought about this to think about whether or not it would be more interesting for a person to stay home and watch a Marvel movie, for
Mm.
example, or, on their big screen TV with popcorn that they can make in their kitchen,
Right.
or come to see a show that they don't know if they're going to like, and that's really expensive, and maybe they have to dress up, and maybe it's in another language, and maybe,
There's
they
all
don't
these
want to
potential
read
barriers.
subtitles all night.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's all these potential
yeah,
barriers for entry. And
yeah.
I think that's a really great question because in the age of streaming services, that's literally the competition.
Right. And they can watch operas online.
Totally.
They don't have to go. And I think that we're kind of forgetting that. In Chicago, we have a great theater culture, but
But
that
outside of major
doesn't,
cities, like outside of
yeah,
New York, Chicago, LA, San
right,
Francisco, I'm sure I'm
right.
forgetting some. Sorry if you live in a major city with a great arts culture that I didn't mention. Um,
Dallas.
Dallas, great, but like that,
Yeah.
I'm living in Phoenix right now, and that does not exist as far as I've seen.
Sorry to hear that.
Well, I mean, we're getting there. We're growing. Uh,
Not that you're living in Phoenix, that
oh yeah, no,
you,
I figured.
yeah.
I figured. We are recording this in the week before we're supposed to have 100-degree temperatures. It's mid-April right now. Um, but
Oh, I'm so sorry.
yeah, it'll
Ooh,
happen. I'm
I
sure
don't know how.
by the time this comes out, it will be well into the hundreds. But that's
Wow.
off topic, of course. Um, I mean, it's
No, I think about that all the time,
yeah.
actually.
Uh,
Climate change, but that's okay.
yeah. I think this is such an interesting topic and conversation, and thank you for
Yeah,
being open and honest with it because sometimes you can ask a question about the future of opera and the fact that opera isn't really serving any community as it exists today, and people get like defensive and they get uptight, and I think that makes sense because especially like I can speaking from my perspective because that's the only one I know. I've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in my education and in my time in
right,
getting
right.
the degrees
Yeah,
that I have and spending the time that I have. So like the tradition that I'm most educated in isn't super applicable in 2024. Like that's an
right,
attack on my identity. Uh,
right.
and it's such a hard conversation to have and at this point I think it's not having this conversation is pulling the wool over my own eyes.
Exactly.
So I just want to go back to earlier. I asked what the difference was between an opera and a musical, and maybe the problem that opera is having is part product and part marketing. Like the product of opera
Yeah,
needs to change, and
yeah.
I don't know, maybe we're done with the word opera because it's got so many negative connotations attached to it.
That's interesting.
I'm just spitballing here, like this.
I love that. No, I mean, so one of the reasons I moved away from calling Core an opera company,
Mhm.
I mean, aside from the fact that I wanted to produce more than opera, uh, was that I wanted to be more approachable, even more approachable. And by calling myself an opera company, or myself by calling Core an opera company, it kind of put us into one little basket, right?
Mhm.
And so that makes you more easy to overlook, I think, in some cases. Maybe the lyrics shouldn't build themselves to something different than an opera company, but they they could do more than traditional opera and traditional musical theater, right? They proved that shows like Fire Shove in My Bones
Yeah.
are really popular, and people came out in droves for those. I saw the show
Wow.
four times, right? That I think that says a lot.
Yeah.
Well, it was really good.
Yeah,
It was really good.
it was really good.
It
I
was
was able to catch
really
the
good.
I was able to catch the Met broadcast of it. It's incredible, incredible.
Spectacular show. And I don't know. I think maybe we could come up with a new term that encompasses more than just opera, just musical theater. That's something different. Like, okay, so what if during your season you were going to produce a video version of the Dichterliebe?
Sure.
That could, right?
Wonderful song cycle.
Wonderful song cycle by Schumann.
Yep.
But what 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 would that make your company then, right? question mark. So maybe it's better to just start calling us all production companies rather than opera companies or musical theater companies or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it's a really interesting question, and we're not going to answer it today, right?
No, I look forward to not answering it for many years.
Yeah, it's an experiment, right? We get to
Yeah,
experiment and figure out what's what. Uh,
yeah.
so you clearly have done some really incredible work with Core Productions, and I'm just curious,
Thank you.
is there a story behind the name?
Uh, it's it's less exciting than you think.
Okay.
When I first started thinking about what I wanted to name the company, with my business partner at the time, Dylan Bandy, we talked about words that evoke images of like passionate performance.
Mm,
And I thought, okay, so courage, cœur, core, like heart, um, uh, chorus, like all these things. It kept coming back to the root word core, and so we decided to name the company Core. I wanted to use a word that would immediately evoke that sort of idea of passion of feeling something.
mm,
I didn't say this earlier. One of the things that I spent time thinking about was what initially drew me to opera. And I think when I was 15, 14 or 15, no, earlier, 13, maybe 12 or 13, I had a friend who was studying classical music. And I went to see her sing. I've never been to a classical concert before. And when she opened her mouth, something inside of my gut reacted.
mm.
It just looked like, oh. And so I felt that feeling. And then I went to see Carmen for the first time that same year, for my first opera, Carmen. Yeah. And I had the same feeling. I forgot I was watching something. I was so involved in the story and like and the music and what was happening. And I forgot myself, and I just wanted to get back to that feeling, that intense feeling. I think that having a visceral reaction to something means that you're connecting with it. Whether or not you like it is another story, but having a gut reaction to something means that you feel something, right? And I wanted to get back to that. So that's the that's the origin of core. We threw a K on there just to make it feel a little fancier.
To make it a little trendy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there was also another core productions at the time that
Oh,
was like core, and we were like, okay, we're gonna be different.
yeah.
I
So
don't know if they're around
KOR
anymore.
Productions, link in the description,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Uh, Fantastic. So what's next for you and for Core? It has something to do with having guests for dinner, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So thank you for asking. We did that workshop in February with Winiko and Hillman Opera at SUNY Fredonia. And so now we're looking for partners to do a professional production. And we're putting together, so on our website will be information about the show and some clips from the video. We're just waiting to get those clips together. So, but I'm excited because it's a really, really fun and funny show. And it explores some dark themes,
Mm.
but I think it's still relatable. I mean, it is about a cannibal who invites his guests over for dinner to get to know them before he eats them. So
It's pretty dark.
it's really dark, but it's very funny. There's a lot of pun humor. There's a lot of it's very interesting, and there is a romantic relationship, but it's not the center. It's not the focus of the story. It's more so, you know, at the core of us, who are we as human beings? Are we trusting people or are we not trusting them? Is that person uh, does that person have my best interest at heart, or don't they? Are they cannibal, or are they just a little bit weird? And so
That's the first question
it's
on my
really
mind when
fun.
I meet someone new. Is this person a cannibal? I
Are
hope
they
not.
just a little weird? Yeah.
Just a little weird.
So so I think that doing that workshop was really beneficial for us, and I'm so grateful to SUNY Fredonia for having us, and for Winnico, the Western New York Chamber Orchestra, for playing for our recording. They they're wonderful partners. If anyone's looking for an orchestra to work with, they're fantastic. I really want to challenge opera companies to do more works like this. Robert, like me, had a moment where he was like, there's no comedy being written right now. What's going on? Everyone's writing like tragedies and stories about trauma. And not that those things don't need to be talked about. It's just that we used to have comedies come out too, comedy and drama. And so he wrote this hilarious uh, libretto, and Nick Fence set it to music, and I love it. It's a show that sparkles with a certain kind of darkness and humor, and it's really easy is the wrong word. It's very accessible. The story is really accessible. The
Mhm.
music is really accessible, and
I was going to ask if there's
there
any sort of musical inspirations that you might want to give hints towards.
uh I I don't know. I haven't put my finger on that yet.
Okay.
Thank you for asking me that, but I think it's very warm and lush. It's a
Mm.
very like post-romantic kind of feeling, but there are definitely harmonies in there that are challenging, um, but not but it won't feel strange to any new opera goers. The music won't feel difficult to approach,
Mm.
which is something that I look for in music. Another composer we've worked with a lot is Felix Gerard, and his music is also really lush and warm. Um, and so I I look for music that makes me want to listen to
Yeah.
it, and
So more
I
more romantic, less baroque.
yes,
Okay.
yeah. Although
Okay.
I mean there are elements that are it is a chamber orchestra, so some woodwinds and strings and piano, um, and so it doesn't feel so heavy
Sure.
as a romantic orchestra, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Um, but the style of writing is definitely more towards that
Yeah.
than not.
It
Yeah.
sounds like a fantastic work. I know that there are some
Beautiful.
executive directors who both listen to the podcast and have been on the podcast. So executive
Oh,
directors,
cool.
take note. If Johanna seems like the type of person that you would want to work with, she certainly seems like the type of person that I would want to work with. Then you can contact her. How? What's the best way for them or for anyone
Great.
to contact you?
So you can either submit through our website, which is korproductions.org, or you can email me at Johanna Moffitt. That'll be in the .kor@gmail.com. And I mean, reach out to me. There's the usual stuff, the Instagram, Facebook. I check that stuff regularly, so feel free to reach out. I would be so happy to find a partner through your podcast. That would be so cool.
That would make me really happy too.
Yeah.
So of course, all of those relevant links will be in the description. But
Yeah.
Joanna, I have had such a fantastic time speaking with you, and I never know sort of what direction these conversations are going to go when we started or when we start. But I'm really glad with how this turned out. So thank you so much for your time and your energy and the incredible insight that you have on this weird profession that we both seem to have chosen.
Thank you so much for having me. I really have enjoyed this conversation a lot.
My absolute pleasure. I hope to talk to you again soon.
Absolutely.
I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation just as much as we enjoyed having it. Before you run off, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And don't forget about that mind-body connection quiz in the description down below. It is the jumping off point for, at this point, hundreds of singers who are really taking the term athlete and making it their own. I can't wait to see your results, and I'll catch you next week.